that federal government spends billions of dollars, and we focus more on mobilizing this capital, deploying it in completing the projects. And once those projects have been commissioned and everybody goes home, the story ends there. We have a plethora of those assets that are lying around across the country. Many government programs, large infrastructure assets have been deployed. But the question is, have those assets, or are those assets delivering the value for which they were established? Can we truly say that the investments that were made in putting up those assets were worth it? We know of stories such as Ajaokuta Steel, Delta Steel, let alone many others who are pretty much in the annals and the history of a country. In terms of the fact that we spent billions of dollars on those assets, they really never went anywhere. And so for us, this event today marks a major turning point in how we manage public assets. I recall sometimes last year, the Honorable Minister of Education reached out and expressed a major concern. And what is that concern? It is the fact that government is spending a huge amount of money in deploying some of these renewable assets across educational institutions, teaching hospitals. But in most cases, after they have been deployed, something as simple as a panel not working or a battery being faulty can mean a whole 10 megawatts worth tens of millions of dollars being abandoned. This is not anything that is being made up. It is a reality. We have scenarios. I do recall the DG budget raised an alarm on this issue because constantly after all the resources have been deployed in these resources, in these assets, the agencies come back to the budget office and they ask for budget allocation to maintain the same assets that have been there or to even build them from scratch. And the DG at that point, I recall, called a meeting with RA to say that this issue must be fixed. I also recall, Honorable Minister of Power, one of the things that you had said to us when you came in was the fact that it is not about making announcements about how much power we're going to generate. It is the fact that when we look at that whole ecosystem, a lot of resources have been deployed, whether it is in terms of the transmission network, how much money we've deployed in the transmission network, in the discos, in the gencos. The question is, when you look at the entire power sector, if the estimates that are out there are correct, which is the fact that about 45,000 megawatts is what is being used to power our economy, at best, what we get from the grid is no more than 5,000 or 6,000 megawatts, which means that a large percentage of it is off-grid. The question is, to what extent are we optimizing the assets that we have invested so much of our money in putting out there? Us at MOFI, this was one of the major reasons why MOFI was restructured and repositioned to what it is today. We're asked to address three key questions. The first one is, what do we own? Because in a lot of public discussions, there is a lot of discussions around how much we owe as a nation. We can almost tell you to the last kobo how much we owe, both domestic as well as foreign debt. The question is, what do we own? That is a question that has remained unanswered for a very long time. Until we are able to establish what we own, we would not be in a position to optimize and make the best use of what we own. When we started this assignment, the first exercise, when we wanted to establish what we own, what we could actually authenticate and verify was that it was 1.25 trillion naira for all our assets. Yet, Our debts were running into tens of trillions of naira. The question is, where are the assets that we spent all this money on? And what are those assets doing in terms of delivering on the impact for which we invested in them for? What are the cash flows that are coming from those assets to ensure that at the very minimum they can contribute to the debt servicing obligations? Those questions remain unanswered for a while. And so one of the key things that we set out to do was to establish what is it that we own, how much they are worth. So we begin the journey of optimizing those assets, ensuring that they deliver on the impact for which they were established, to ensure that the revenues that should accrue from there should come and begin to contribute towards our debt servicing obligations, and also extra revenues to maintain those assets in a way that makes them sustainable. The second main mandate for us was to professionalize the management of our corporate assets. In other words, government-owned entities or government-linked enterprises need to be professionalized in terms of how we manage them. We have to have the right governance. We have to have the right performance metrics in place. We have to have the right board. We have the right management in place, as well as the capabilities and the resources that are needed to ensure that these companies are delivering on the mandate for which they were established and also contribute towards the revenues of the country. And that is the reason why we created a platform that allows us to enumerate those entities and work with the boards and the management of those entities to ensure that there is clarity of purpose and the direction of travel is also very clear. And the third part of it is mobilizing capital at scale so we can invest that capital to different sectors of the economy. Now, when you look at those three mandates, one, establishing what we own so we can better manage them. Secondly, professionalizing how those corporate entities are run, managed, and governed. And thirdly, mobilizing capital. RAMCO falls across those three areas. I expected a better recognition of that. And that is why I'm very delighted that we have partners, especially the ministers. Minister of Education, thank you very much, sir, for being on the heels of this and putting pressure on all of us to deliver on this. Minister of Power, thank you for your leadership. I know this is one of the first things that you started and ensure that this must take off. We thank you that you've made this a reality. For Ministry of Health, thank you. Because I do recall sometimes back, many of you will remember, that at the teaching hospital in Ibadan, patients were dying because generators were being used. Many generators were being used to power the infrastructure at the hospital. It was such an unpleasant sight. And that's just one case of many of our hospitals that lack basic power. In the middle of surgery, power goes off. In the middle of administering medication, power goes off. So we can imagine what that means. So we're glad that the Ministry of Health is here as partners in this journey. I also want to thank the chairs of both MOFI, as well as the boards of REA and the chairman, the boards of InfraCorp for coming together. Because we know clearly that without this, it will not happen. DigiBudget, thank you. Because I know this is something that has bothered you for a long time. And in fact, we try to expand the scope of this work to include other renewable programs and also ensure that our fiscal space recognizes that these assets exist. And we must ensure that before we go back to government to ask for money to expand them or to run them, we must make the most use of what we already have.